Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Canadian Shield. My name's Sterling. I'm your host. Covering a lot of stories in this episode. The federal government claiming that they're environmentalists and they're worried about the ecosystems of Canada have lifted a moratorium that's been in place since the 90s on cod fishing, on international ships coming through, massive things that can pull the fish out of the water, process it, put it into a can, put a label on it, all before it leaves Canadian waters. It doesn't even have to go anywhere to do all of the processing ship. In Ontario, a town in Ontario has voted to store nuclear material underground. That's kind of interesting. In Montreal, they tore down a pro-Hamas encampment that had been on the McGill University. They used private security in some way, in some parts of the teardown where private security was utilized. Average rents in Canada have gone up nearly 10% since the last year. The inflation rate has gone up, back up 2 points. So for all of Chrystia Freeland talking about how it's come down, it's funny how she didn't mention it going back up. And last but not least, Saskatchewan has got an injunction to stop Stephen Guilbeault from taking money through the CRA for the carbon tax. Before I get into it, I would encourage you all to like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell, share this channel with your socials. Okay, so beginning in Newfoundland, there was an environment ministers meeting for the provinces happening there. And the Newfoundland Fish Harvesters, which is the union, crashed the news conference to demand reinstating the cod moratorium. Harvesters call for a meeting with Trudeau, good luck with that, and a return to the stewardship fisheries. I don't believe that we should be letting foreign countries take our fish. And I definitely don't believe they should be doing it in gigantic, massive football field size boats that can pull out hundreds of tons in a minute. Fish harvesters in Newfoundland crashed the podium at a meeting of Canada's environment ministers in St. John's on Wednesday, demanding a meeting with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau over the federal government's decision to reopen the commercial cod fishery in Newfoundland and Labrador. The federal government made this decision for all their talk about how they want to protect the environment, for all their talk about how they're looking out for the Canadian economy. They're going to permit foreign ships to come in, take our fish and leave without ever paying a dime and without ever having to worry about what they're doing to the environment. They're not worried about taking out baby fish. The irresponsibility in this is just as bad as hiring that anti-Semite to look after the Human Rights Commission. Members of the Fish, Food, and Allied Workers Union came to the news conference to voice their calls for Ottawa to revert its decision to end the moratorium on cod fishing and reinstate a stewardship fishery in the province. The moratorium has been in place since 1992, when overfishing from dragging trawlers near and abroad nearly destroyed the stock. Was removed in June. Inshore fishermen are set to receive 84% of the 18,000-ton total allowable catch, but the reopening of the commercial fishery also allows dragging to resume. Now, this dragging is terrible. These nets are very heavy, and they drop, they have gigantic lines on them, and they grab everything that's there. They just pull it right along the bottom. It doesn't matter what it is, if it's a rock, if it's another kind of fish. It's really irresponsible, and it's really anti-environmental, and the federal government should not be permitting it. They should definitely not be permitting foreign trawlers to come into Canadian waters to take fish out. They absolutely should not be doing that. So moving over to Montreal, the McGill University tore down the Hamas encampment that was there. They used, private security as well as provincial and city security. The police came in pretty heavy. They had riot gear on. A couple of them were wearing anti-stab uniforms. I don't know if those were the private security or if those were just specialized police forces. I couldn't see any badging to determine, but I know what those suits were. They were the suits that you put on. They kind of are a little puffy, and they stop you from getting. They're not bulletproof stuff, but they will stop sharp pointy objects, and they will stop like sticks and bottles and stuff like that from causing you excessive damage. Under pouring rain, pro-Palestinian protesters carried their belongings off McGill University's downtown Montreal campus on Wednesday as bulldozers and security forces dismantled the encampment that had been in the school's lower field since April. Earlier that day, McGill President Deep Sani called the encampment one of many that had sprung up on campuses across the continent since the start of the Israeli-Hamas war, a heavily fortified focal point for intimidation and violence, organized largely by individuals who are not part of the university community. I'll say it again. He called the spot a heavily fortified focal point for intimidation and violence. Now, I understand that protesters are supposed to be the peaceful kind, but when you're intimidating passersby, when you're targeting people for the God that they worship, you are doing things that I do not agree with. If you want to put up a sign and have a protest, you go right ahead. But when you start trying to intimidate people and when you start trying to scare people, I think that the police letting you walk away is probably more than you deserve. That's just my opinion. You can let me know your opinion down in the comments. And I don't mean specifically for this particular conflict. I mean anywhere. If you're in marching up and down the streets trying to intimidate people, then you deserve to be, that's a threat, right? And if I were to say something mean on the internet, they would call that threat. So why is it that you can do it on the street and not be arrested for threatening people? Now, the pro-Hamas supporters are saying that they're going to do a counter-protest next week, and they're saying they're taking them back to court because apparently McGill, even though they own the land, some judge in Montreal said they're not allowed to remove people from it. It's too late now. You're out of there, and they will know in no way, shape, or form will they allow you to come back. You can be certain of that. I am a little distressed by the idea that they hired a private security firm. I mean, what are we running Blackwater in Canada now? And how many other cities and municipalities are there these private securities? Are these private securities permitted to be armed? How come they can be armed and Canadians cannot be armed? There's questions around this, but I couldn't find any name for the said security, so I can't say one way or the other. For all I know, they just were the same as the guys you would put in, people you would put in the mall. There's, so much variation. They could have looked as heavily armed as one of them Brinks trucks guys. I don't know, but I will look into it because I think it's a little bit of a disturbing trend for the federal government to say to me that it's not okay, but then all of a sudden privately you can do it and it is okay. It's kind of weird. You can let me know what you think down in the comments. So this is a bit of a weird story. An Ontario town votes to become a host to nuclear waste. The town council in Ignacy voted to become a site of deep geological repository for nuclear waste after the community voted 77% in favor. Now, I am certain that the reason that they voted in favor is because it probably comes with a buttload of jobs. A Northern Ontario town has formally decided it's willing to become the site of a deep geological repository for Canada's nuclear waste. The Nuclear Waste Management Organization plans to select a site this year where millions of bundles of used nuclear fuel will be placed in a network of underground rooms connected by cavernous tunnels. The process for the $26 billion project has already been narrowed down to sites Ignacy in Northern Ontario and another in Southern Ontario. Okay, this is the part I like. The organization, funded by corporations that generate nuclear power and waste, such as Ontario Power Generation and Hydro-Quebec, is instead planning to build deep geological repository as far underground as the CN Tower is tall. The used nuclear fuel pellets will be baked into ceramic, are contained in fuel rods made of corrosion-resistant zircaloy. Those rods, so now you get the pellets in ceramic, and all of that together is put into a corrosion-resistant material called zircaloy. Those rods will be in a container made of carbon steel and then coated with copper. And those containers will be packed into bentonite clay, and then the entire cavern will be lined with lead and steel and all kind and many inches of cement. Wow. It's incredible to me that we would in some way, shape or form decide that this is pretty safe. Now, I would be speaking from ignorance if I told you how long they last or how long the pellets how much energy they manufacture. But I think knowing that this is how much we got to go through to get rid of them, bury them. I mean, for a long time, the CN Tower was the tallest building in the world, and we got to bury that straight down. And then we got to go through all of this to keep these radioactive isotopes under control. I don't know necessarily that it's quite the benefit that people think. Now, I understand if you're in one of the, it's probably better than burning coal, but we may need to start figuring out a way to reverse the process, or we may need to start figuring out a way to store them. That's a lot of stuff going through. I waffle back and forth between what's going to be the last story in this segment, because both of the stories are a big, gigantic, you have been not telling us the truth, Liberal Party. And I've decided to go with the one that doesn't fly in the face of the bullies just quite yet. The average asking rent in Canada is up 7% from a year ago. 7% it's gone up. The shelter has long been driving in the face of high inflation. So no vacancy sign is shown in front of the West End Vancouver apartment. The average asking rent in Canada reached $2,185 in June, up 7% compared to a year ago, despite representing the slowest annual growth in 13 months, according to the report on the by Urbanation and Rentals.ca. So despite all of the Liberals' promises that they're tackling housing, that they're doing all of these things that are supposed to be making life better for us, housing went up 7%. Your rent didn't go up. Your income didn't go up 7%, did it? Did you get a 7% raise? Or did you find that now you're paying more for rent, and now you're paying more for gas, now you're paying more for food, now you're paying more for everything in your life, despite all of the promises and all of the reassurances and all of the far left losing their mind every time you try and say something like, hey, let's be more responsible with our money and let's get things under control. This is the one that's kind of interesting. The shelter has been driving up inflation with a CPI basket weight of 28.57%. It's contributed more to overall inflation than any other component measured by Statistics Canada. Now, the basket, what they do is they go to a specific region and they put in a bunch of things that everybody needs, and then they take that price and they compare it to the price that it was last year. So the basket is a really good indicator of inflation, because it's never measured against, like you take a basket from Toronto and you measure that basket against Toronto. You don't measure that basket against Edmonton. You don't measure Toronto's basket against Nunavut. You don't measure Toronto's basket against Vancouver's. Vancouver has their own basket. Every region has a different specific basket, and it's really one of the only ways that we can gauge. It's an accurate gauge of inflation in this country, and we can see that because rent covers nearly 30% of the increase, it is causing inflation all over the country, despite the Liberals trying to convince you that it's different. And you think about the idea that most, like $2,185, that's without electricity or however you heat, but it's probably electricity, and without groceries. So now you need to be making what to get approved for this apartment? 50 G's, 55 G's. I mean, it's not like somebody who's just making barely enough. The rent alone is nearly $30,000, which is close to minimum wage. So it's really a problem that the government is not fixing, though they keep saying it. And people, because the press is not scrutinizing it, people are not being told the truth. What I like is this one. Right? Canada's inflation rate ticked up to 2.9% in May, according to the most recent data. So even though Chrystia Freeland ran up and down the House of Commons going, oh, it came down 3 months in a row, it went up 2 points now that the summer has kicked in and the gas prices are back and more people have come into the country. And so there is even more demand for housing. The federal government is not fixing these problems, and we as Canadians need to start calling them out, because the systems that we have in place to traditionally look after that are compromised, and they're not doing it for us. Okay, so I saved the best for last, and in this case, it's pretty cool. Saskatchewan has been granted an injunction to block the CRA from collecting the carbon tax. The federal government, when the Saskatchewan decided that they weren't going to collect the carbon tax, had put an end run in one of the bodies of legislation that said that they could start to collect it without their permission, collect it directly. They don't need the province's permission. And the province has said, no, you absolutely do. And they went and took it to a judge, and the judge agreed with them. The court has granted Saskatchewan an emergency injunction against the CRA to block the federal government from collecting the carbon tax directly. The minister has said the province sought an injunction to stop this unfair and unconstitutional cash grab by the Trudeau government. So that flies right in the face of Stephen Guilbeault. And how many times are these guys going to be taken to court only to be told that what they're doing is unconstitutional? What they're doing goes against the code of conduct that is established in our body of laws. How many times are we going to allow this government to try and break the laws that we are utilizing to sustain this country? I mean, how many times do I have to hear them all say, oh, no, it's a rule of law country, And yet every time I turn around, the federal liberals are pushing the envelope to the point where these laws don't seem to matter to them. It doesn't seem like a rule of law government. It seems more like a government that is attempting to skirt the law, change the law, and remove our freedoms, remove our protections. Are they trying to maybe do an end run on a coup in this country? Are they maybe hoping to destroy this country and cause it to break down into regions of province? I don't know. I can't say, but I can tell you with absolute certainty that as a lifelong Canadian, it is 100% confusing to me when I hear them say that they care about the lives of Canadians while they break every law that this country is founded on to do things that 77 out of 10 Canadians disagree with. I mean, at what point do they say to themselves, we are no longer work? At what point do Canadians say the government is no longer working for us, they are working against us? You can leave me your thoughts down in the comments. I'm going to wrap here. I want to thank you all for listening. I'll talk to you next time.